Hello, I am Donna Warren with the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and the Association for Informal Logic and Critical Thinking, ALACT, and I am pleased to welcome you to this third in the series of speakers for ALACT, Stephen Oswald, who is here to talk about rhetorical effects of insinuation. So I happily turn it over to Steve. Steve, it's all yours.
Thank you, Donna. So let me just share my screen. Okay. Does that work? Okay, perfect. All right. Well, thank you very much for this invitation. I'm going to talk about insinuation. That's something I've been toying with for the past years, and now we have a research project. So I'm really interested in the effects that insinuation might have in argumentation, but not only. And today I'm going to start by presenting to you some features of insinuation as they have been discussed in the literature, which is mainly theoretical. Then I will move on to discussing two rhetorical effects of insinuation. The first is its persuasive effect, and the second, its staining effect. And I'm going to end with a discussion of the results and maybe an opening. Let's see. Okay. So let's start with the features of insinuation that are available when you read about it in scholarly work. I'm going to first start with a couple of examples, just to make sure that we're on the same page about the stuff, the kind of phenomena I have in mind. This guy here is the 8th Earl of Arran, so Sir Lord, I think, or Sir Arthur Captain Dyke Strange David Archibald Gore, who was a member of the House of Lords in the UK, and he's most known for leading the effort to decriminalize male homosexuality in 1967. So he was very active, and he was the one who passed a bill to make it legal to be gay. He also had another bill that he wanted to pass, which had to do with badgers, because apparently on his property he had lots of badgers, and he was trying to make sure that people don't kill them because he thought they were lovely creatures. And unfortunately, all his efforts didn't pay off, and he couldn't pass any bill on protecting the badgers. And he's reported to have answered a question from a journalist. You have it down here. The journalist asked why this effort had failed, whereas decriminalizing homosexuality has succeeded. And Aaron is reported to have replied, "There are not many badgers in the House of Lords." And by that, he insinuated, implied, you pick your term, that there are many gay people in the House of Lords. I might come back to this example afterwards. This is not, to me, the best example of insinuation, but nonetheless, I think you have an idea of what I have in mind. The most classical, canonical example that you find, at least in the literature that I have read, is the story of a sea captain and his first mate. That goes like this. The captain, annoyed by his first mate drunkenness, wrote in the ship's log, "The first mate was drunk all day." The first mate read this and confronted the captain, who then replied, "Well, it was true, wasn't it?" The following day, the first mate, whose normal duties included writing up the ship's log, got his revenge. He wrote, "The captain was sober all day." When the captain read the log, he became angry at the implication that he was not normally sober. When confronted by the captain, the first mate replied, "Well, it was true, wasn't it?" And indeed, it was true, the captain was sober, but the implication that he's normally not sober, i.e. drunk, might not be true, and that's what he suggested. That's what he insinuated. Okay, so I draw on the work by David Bell for the characterization of the features of insinuation. He makes a distinction between innuendo and insinuation. Mostly has to do with the fact that insinuation is directed at third parties, while innuendo is directed at third parties, while insinuation at the direct hearer. But for the purposes of this talk, innuendo and insinuation will be treated more or less interchangeably. And he defines this as follows. An innuendo is a non-overt intentional negative ascription, whether true or false, usually in the form of an implicature, which is understood as a charge or accusation against what is, for the most part, a non-present party. So from that definition, we can extract the following features. So it expresses an implicit negative ascription, usually an implicature, so in the Gricean framework, that set of implicit meanings that are conveyed through flouts of the conversational maxims. It is plausibly deniable, that is, the first mate can deny having meant that the captain was usually drunk, and that's actually what he did. And that means that it has at least two alternative interpretations. One is the insinuated implicit content, and the other one is the safer alternative meaning on which the insinuator can fall back when he or she is called out for having insinuated something that was disparaging. And importantly, there's a reason why we insinuate. It's because it's not safe to say the same thing explicitly, right? So insinuations, innuendos, they are risky, they are delicate, they appear, as Bell has it, at critical junctures. So situations in which it's not safe for whatever consequence, be it social, retribution, any kind of a negative consequence for the speaker, to say explicitly what they are conveying implicitly. So we don't really insinuate good things. I will never insinuate that someone is happy unless there's a norm in the group that people should not be happy. Okay, now I'm mostly interested in the perlocutions in the Austinian sense, so the effects of a speech act, of insinuation, and in the literature they have been mostly linked to persuasion. So it's used for perlocutionary advantages, and specifically its persuasive power, which you find in advertising. Bell says that the humorous and titillating effects are often of innuendo make it often used as a persuasive technique in advertising, and it produces certain changes in the beliefs of the audience. In the case of the sea captain, beliefs which could quite easily destroy his career. That's the first perlocutionary effect, the persuasive effect that has been documented, at least theoretically. And the second is the staining effect. So Bell considers that innuendo has a permanent staining effect on the target, and that effect can be far more devastating than the explicit assertion of a charge. So insinuation can be worse in terms of reputational stain than assertion. And he goes further. He says, even when the charge implied by an innuendo is refuted, so even if you deny that the disparaging comment was meant, or you say that it's not the case, there is a remaining effect on the reputation of the target. So where there's smoke or fire, there's smoke, or I don't know in which way it goes, but you get the idea. Bruce Fraser in 2001 doubles down, and he says that the stain, whether it's true or not, tends to remain associated with the target. So if you insinuate something about someone, even if that's denied, they say that there's a lingering suspicion that will remain. Unfortunately, to this day, there's no empirical evidence for these claims. So what we try to do is get it. So I'm going to present the two sets of experiments that we conducted to test these two claims. Okay, so let's start with the first one, with a quote from a 17th century French clergyman who was fond of insinuation. And let's look at persuasiveness. So this was the work conducted within my I'm a Fun project, implicit meaning and argumentation, functions, uses, and norms, which runs until the end of next year, and was linked to the cost action 1732. Which looked, well, now it's run its course, but it was the European Network for Argumentation and Public Policy Analysis. Some of you have been involved in this. So because I was part of that, I could apply for a special funding scheme with the Swiss National Fund, and that's where I got this money for this project. This is Daniel de Oliveira Fernandez, my PhD student. And in that project, we have a very simple aim. We want to put rhetoric and argumentation together with pragmatics, with the idea that there are different rhetorical effects that can be presumably triggered by different types of pragmatic content. So implicatures may be conducive to some rhetorical effects, presuppositions to others, so on and so forth. So what we want to do is gather experimental evidence for those rhetorical effects as they may be pragmatically mediated by different types of meaning. Okay, so sorry. If we turn to insinuation and think about how or what kind of role it can play in argumentative scenarios, well, it's a type of content which conveys a negative ascription, and we think that it makes it an ideal candidate to realize a personal attack. So any argument of the ad hominem type. So instead of asserting a disparaging comment that supports a standpoint, a speaker can insinuate it and convey the same content. So imagine A says we should do X, B can reply, you're wrong, I mean, you're so dumb. That would be the explicit ad hominem of the abusive kind. Or they could say, you're wrong, I mean, you have a very peculiar relationship with intelligence. That could insinuate the same thing, i.e. you're dumb. But it could also, if the speaker, if called out on this, could also say, no, what I actually meant is that sometimes what you say is genius and sometimes I don't understand you. So that's what I meant. So there's always a way to back down and say that you meant something else. Okay, so our research question was at that point whether insinuated ad hominem, IAH, is more persuasive than asserted ad hominem. And we tried to think of an experimental design to test this. So we came up with a series of, I think it was 39 or 40 scenarios, which all looked the same about different situations of harmless discussions. So no politics, no social issues, no high-stake topics. And we submitted those scenarios to our participants and asked them a couple of questions. So this is what it looked like. There was a topic here, ordering food. A small context, Kevin and Leonard are spending the evening together. They're discussing what they would like to order for dinner and the creativity that makes a cook exceptional. And Kevin says, the staff of this restaurant really doesn't do anything good. And Leonard replies, I think you're wrong. I mean, you don't have any understanding of cooking. So this would be the insinuation, the insinuation, the assertion, because here Leonard is attacking Kevin on the grounds that Kevin doesn't know anything about cooking. And then we ask people, according to you, to what extent does the argument of Leonard, so this one here, support his claim that Kevin is wrong? And we did instruct participants in the training phase to understand this as an argument and this as a claim. So they knew what they were doing. So that was the asserted ad hominem condition, but that was contrasted with an insinuated ad hominem condition. So there was another version of this item in which the only difference was here. And Leonard said, I mean, someone could explain to you how cooking works. And that insinuates you don't know anything about cooking, but doesn't state it explicitly. We had different types of insinuation that we built based on the examples that we found in the literature. So to express the ad hominem via insinuation, we had these different formats. Many people don't know about cooking, meaning you know nothing about cooking. You would have trouble telling, I don't know, something from something else. Again, insinuating incompetence. It's a shame that some people, not everybody knows how to cook. Someone could explain to you what cooking is. You're not in a position to judge cooking. And have you heard about good cooking? So these were the variants that all insinuated, crucially, the same thing that was explicitly asserted in the first condition. And then we opposed that to a neutral condition that had an argument from consequence or any other arguments that was not marked as a personal attack, just to have a baseline for comparison. Okay, so this was a within subject design, so all participants saw all conditions, but crucially only one version of each item. So the first measure that we had was, according to you, to what extent does the argument of Leonard support that his claim that Kevin is wrong? And the results were very disappointing. So what we saw is that, so here is the neutral condition. It was regarded as much better argumentatively than the others. But crucially, what we didn't get is any difference between the insinuated ad hominem and the asserted ad hominem. So to that question, it didn't really matter whether the personal attack was insinuated or asserted. We had the same result. So we thought, either there's nothing, or maybe there's something wrong. I got ejected for a minute. Are you there? Okay. Can you still see my slides? Okay. Sorry about this. Okay, so I do this screen one. Okay. Is that better? Okay. Sorry about that. Let me just remove the banner. And here we go. Okay, so the problem is, do we have a problem in our design, or is there simply no effect? And asserting an ad hominem is the same thing as insinuating one. Then we looked at the question again, and we thought, maybe there's a problem in the way we asked it, because this question might not have captured the possible rhetorical effect of insinuation, because we were asking participants to evaluate whether the content of the argument supports the conclusion. So whether not knowing much about cooking is a good reason to claim that Kevin is wrong. Okay. And so we might have lost the effect. Sorry, this was for an old example, but we might have lost the effect of insinuation because participants would have abstracted from the format, so the insinuation, the implicit content that was there, and just went for the propositional content. So we might have lost the effect of insinuation. So we thought, okay, let's keep these items and try to find another measure, another question that we can ask, see if there's something in there. So we decided to look at persuasiveness or perceived persuasiveness in a second run, and then agreement, and I'm reporting on those now. So we took the same items, but then we asked the following question. Based on this exchange between Kevin and Leonard, how persuasive do you find Leonard's statement? So just asking people what they think. Is there a difference there? Do you like one better than the other? Well, do you find one more persuasive than the other? And these were the results. So again, the neutral arguments were much better than the personal attacks. But this time, even if it's not very big, the difference between the insinuation and the assertion is significant, statistically significant. So we can't say that it's just by chance. There seems to be something, and people seem to prefer, even if slightly, insinuations when they are performing personal attacks than assertions. Okay, so that's encouraging. There seems to be something, but we're not quite sure what it is yet. So we decided to see what we can do to further qualify this idea of persuasiveness. And we decided basically to measure that by measuring the degree of agreement of participants with the speaker, so the insinuator, but also with the target of the insinuation. So again, the same items, but we said, based on this exchange between Kevin and Leonard, to what extent do you think Kevin is right? So this time we asked people, do you think that the guy who got disparaged is right? Here are the results. So this time the neutral arguments were worse in establishing the agreement with the target, but again, no difference here between the insinuation and the assertion. So nothing significantly different between both. So whether you use insinuation or assertion to perform a personal attack doesn't make a difference when it comes to agreeing with the target of the attack. So that tells us that the higher level of perceived persuasiveness for insinuation that we saw in the previous experiment is not related to seeing the target as being wrong. So what about the speaker? Is it related to this, to the fact that we think that the speaker is right, the insinuator is right? So we measured again the same items, but we asked participants, to what extent do you think Leonard is right? So the insinuator. And there we have a reversed graph with the results. And unfortunately, no statistical difference again between insinuation and assertion. So that's a bit annoying. So there's a higher perceived persuasiveness of insinuation over assertion that we established before, but it doesn't seem to hinge on issues of agreement with the content of the arguments. So what do we do now? So we thought, okay, so maybe because insinuations seem to attack, well, when they're used as ad hominem arguments, they are used to attack the target. Maybe it has to do with the image of these people, either the speaker or the target of the insinuation. Maybe persuasion is not to be found on logos issues, but on ethos issues. So we decided to explore that track a bit further. And that means we need to come up with a kind of measure to find out how people consider these speakers in those scenarios. And we came across some work from, I think it's business communication and management, the work of Mayer, Davis, and Shorman, who define trust as the willingness of a party to be vulnerable to the actions of another party, based on the expectation that the other will perform a particular action important to the truster, irrespective of the ability to monitor or control that other party. And crucially, they have a threefold model of trust, whereby you decide to trust someone based on three dimensions. The first is ability, so how skilled, expert is the person in the domain under consideration. That has to do with competence. So the idea is that the more competent you think the speaker is, the more you will trust them on questions of their expertise. The second is integrity. So how honest, fair, and sincere is the person, has to do with moral and ethical values. And finally, benevolence. How much does the person care for me and my interests? And has to do with altruism and not being too egocentric. Now, these three dimensions remind us of something, of course, because more than 2,000 years ago, someone talked about arete, eunoia, and phronesis, which are basically these things. So they do recognize that there is some Aristotelian filiation, but it's not very prominent. And this is how it looks. So you have trust in the middle, which is influenced by how much you think the speaker is competent, benevolent, and has integrity. And this is how basically they say that it works. So we wanted to operationalize this in our experiments to take advantage of these three measures to see how people assess trust in those scenarios. So we trained participants. We told them before the actual questionnaire that they will be working with three human characteristics, ability, which we defined, benevolence, and integrity. So they were exposed to the definitions that we had in mind, which were based on the work of Mayer and colleagues. And then they had a slide where they had to match every of these definitions to the right label. So they had to drag and drop the exact definition in the right box, and they couldn't proceed until they had gotten it right. So we were really trying to make sure that they know what we're talking about. And once they succeeded, then they had the questionnaire again. They read the items, and they had to answer the following question. Based on this exchange between, so here's Elena and Francine, but we had Kevin and Leonard. To what extent do you find Leonard to be a person of ability? And then they have to put the slider where they think their answer fits. A person of integrity and a person of benevolence. All right, so with that in mind, this is what we measured in terms of how people perceive the ethos of the insinuator. These are the results. So the neutral argument is always on top. It gets better scores. So the one that is not a personal attack, and the personal attacks insinuated and asserted are below. But systematically, we have a higher score of perceived trustworthiness, for insinuations. So, and this is statistically significant for the three measures, for integrity, ability, and benevolence. So that tells us that if you insinuate an ad hominem attack, you're better off in terms of how people perceive you as a speaker than if you assert it. So in terms of benevolence, competence, and integrity, that's what seems to be happening. In other words, the idea is that insinuations, when used as ad hominems, and this is very specific, we're not talking about insinuations in other contexts, but when they are used as personal attacks, they seem to work their persuasiveness on the dimension of trustworthiness, not on the content of the attack. Okay, so what is reassuring is that in all conditions and in all experiments, ad hominems were scored lower than neutral arguments, which is kind of cool because that means that people don't really like personal attacks when they're, especially when they're bad arguments. And then when insinuation is used as an ad hominem attack, it's perceived to be more persuasive than the assertion. The effect doesn't seem to be due to the content of the ad hominem, but rather to the effect of insinuation on the speaker's ethos, because those who insinuate seem to be perceived as more trustworthy than those who assert the personal attack. So the rhetorical effect of insinuation, when used as ad hominem, seems to be the fact that it reduces negative impact of personal attacks on the attacker, on the insinuator. Okay. So let's move on now to the second set of studies about the stain and the staining effect of insinuation. This is work conducted in collaboration with Tamlin Adato from the University of Neuchâtel, which is another tiny university in Switzerland, not too far from Fribourg. And she worked on this for her MA thesis and decided to focus on the stain. So remember, Bell and Fraser, they were saying that insinuations tend to be more staining than assertions, and they tend to resist to denials, meaning that even if you deny it, people will still think that there was some truth in the attack. So our research questions were, is insinuation more staining than assertion? That was the first study. And then does the stain remain after the insinuation is denied? That's the second study. So for the first study, we opted for a 2x2 within subject design. So again, all participants saw all items, but only one condition per item. And they looked like this. There was a short narrative, then a disparaging dialogue, and a measure. And to incorporate some of the discussions that are currently going on in pragmatics on denials, we decided to include a variation in the context. So let's look at it together. So working extra hours, Adam and Bill have been colleagues for the last 2 years in the same office of an advertising company. The last few months, they have been working extra hours in hopes of getting a promotion. Turns out that Bill got that promotion, and since then, they have not been getting along and have stopped talking to each other. So that's constant for all conditions. But then there was a variation. In the false condition, we have a statement that will then make the insinuation that appears afterwards unwarranted. So since Bill got promoted, Adam is extremely jealous of him. And we contrasted that with a true context. Since Bill got promoted, he started mocking and belittling Adam. So in the false context, Bill is normal, and it's just Adam who's jealous. But in the true context, Bill got promoted, and he was behaving inappropriately towards Adam. Okay, so then participants see the rest. One day, Adam is talking about this frustrating situation with Cole, their manager. Their conversation goes as follows. Cole says, you seem quite upset with Bill since that promotion of his. What's going on? And then we have, again, two conditions. Either Adam insinuates or asserts something bad about Bill. And in the insinuation condition, Adam says, well, I don't know what Bill's main quality is, but mine is being respectful. And that's contrasted to, well, Bill is disrespectful. Both of them mean the same thing, but the first one is an insinuation and the second one is an assertion. After that, people saw on another screen a reminder. Remember what happened? When asked about what was going on with Bill, Adam said, and then they see either the insinuation if they saw the insinuation or the assertion if they saw the assertion. And then they're asked, if you were Cole, how trustworthy would you think Bill is? From not at all to completely trustworthy. Okay, so these were the conditions, sorry. We had 4 counterbalanced and randomized lists. So all participants saw all conditions on different items, and we judged, we tried to ask them a judgment on target trustworthiness. So we had 82 participants, half of them were female, recruited online, and these are the results. So the first thing is that when the context was the false context, it made the assertion and the insinuation less staining because the target is rated as more trustworthy. So these are the red bars here, okay, the red dots here. And in the true context, the blue or green, depending on your screen, we see that both the insinuation and the assertion rank lower, which means that the target is trusted less. Therefore, the stain is higher. The stain on their reputation is higher. So that's what we see. False contexts are overall less staining than true contexts. but in both true and false contexts, target trustworthiness is higher for insinuations than for assertions. So what we see with these results is that if you assert something bad about someone, it stains more than if you insinuate the same thing about that person. So unfortunately, Bell is wrong on that with this kind of design, but Fraser, who was saying that assertions and insinuations behave more or less the same, was right on this one. Then there's a point where they both agree. They say, both of them say that if you deny the insinuation, the stain will remain. So we tested that as well. We decided to keep the same items, but we kept the conversation going on. So I left you at this point before. When Cole asked about what was going on with Bill, Adam said, well, I don't know what Bill's main quality is, but mine is being respectful. If you were Cole, how trustworthy would you think Bill is? So we measured again that, but then we added a denial. So the conversation continues, and Cole says, wait a minute, are you suggesting that Bill is disrespectful? And Adam says, I didn't mean that. I was only saying that my very best quality is being respectful, and I thought this was essential in getting a promotion too. So we have a denial from Adam, who says, no, I didn't mean that Bill is disrespectful. I meant this, okay? And we had the same thing for all our scenarios. Okay. And we basically repeated the measure twice. We measured the stain through trustworthiness judgments after the insinuation and then after the denial. We had 88 participants this time, again, recruited through Prolific, and this is what we found. So false contexts are overall less staining than true contexts, also after the denial. So if there was no grounds in the context for the insinuation to be warranted, then target trustworthiness is higher. So the stain is lower. But what we found is that targets are judged more trustworthy after the denial than before. So in fact, what we see is that someone is disparaged by insinuation, and then there's the denial, their reputation goes up. Their perceived trustworthiness goes up. So that tends to suggest that if you deny having meant something bad, that actually is good for the target. It kind of restores a bit the trust that was very low in that target. So denials actually seem to mitigate the stain, regardless of whether it was in a true or false context, that is a context that warrants pragmatically the insinuation or not. So in this case, both Bell and Fraser got it wrong, according, again, to this very controlled design, okay, which is better than nothing, but still there are questions remaining. Okay, so the first study showed that ad hominem, which is insinuated, outperforms an ad hominem which is asserted in terms of speaker ethos. And now, why is that the case? It could be because when you personally attack someone to their face very explicitly, that could be felt as a very blatant face threat, and that is too damaging for someone's image, and that's perhaps why people don't like it. Okay. The second study showed that insinuation is not more staining than assertion, and that denials do mitigate them, and it makes sense to assume. So in this situation, when you deny having meant something that is bad, what you do is you kind of work on the latitude of interpretation that your original words might have had. So you're trying to make it look more like a misunderstanding than like a personal attack. And that may trigger reinterpretations. And this is actually compatible with a pragmatic account, the one of Diana Mazzarella, who has provided a theoretical account of this that is couched in relevance theory. There's also recent work on denials, experimental work, and it showed that denials tend to mitigate reputational costs incurred by a speaker this time, not the target, who implies something that turns out to be false. So you're better off in terms of your own speaker image when conveying something false if you do it implicitly than explicitly, because then denial is more credible when you had implied something that turned out to be false than when you had asserted something that turned out to be false. Now, in our experiments, we looked at the other side of the coin. We looked at the target of insinuation, not the speaker. And we saw that the insinuation denial of an insinuation can also mitigate the staining effect. All right, so where does that leave us? So for that second experiment, the theoretical claims made in 1997 and 2001 by Fraser and Bell failed to be supported by our results, our experiments. Now, of course, variations in the design could show a different picture because we had something very much controlled with a very stable structure in the design that varied only where the conditions were varying, and we made some choices. And we looked at insinuations that were directed from a speaker to an addressee, but we didn't look at insinuations which were targeting a non-present party. And that might be different. So in other words, if you have to judge an interaction between two people who are attacking each other, or one is attacking the other directly, you might not feel the same way when you are judging another interaction in which two people disparage someone who's not present, because you remove the target from the picture, and therefore you remove the blatant face threats to their in person. So that might be different. This is actually something we're going to test with other students. In the first experiment, we looked at ad hominem arguments, but an ad hominem argument is an argument, therefore it supports a claim. Insinuations can work as insults, that is, just things that you convey about people without using that to support a standpoint, and that might be also different. So whether you are in an argumentative scenario or not might make a difference. Sometimes insinuations can offer genuinely new information that could be relevant. So I haven't shown you all the examples that we had for the first study on persuasion, but we ran an analysis post hoc because so presenting this work at conferences, we had questions about people saying, well, you know, your insinuations don't really look like ad hominem arguments, because someone not knowing anything about cars is a good reason to claim that their statement about cars is wrong. In other words, attacking someone because they're incompetent in a given domain of expertise can be very reasonable to show that what they say is uninformed, and therefore we should not take it on board. So the follow-up that we're preparing right now is one where we operationalize that as a condition. So we have reasonable or sound, or whatever you take your normative pick for that term, personal attacks, and then we have fallacious ones. And then we want to see whether insinuation behaves differently when you are going in one direction or the other. And then what about different types of denials? So when you deny an insinuation, you can do it in different ways if you're called out on it. Because so if I say to someone, if I say about someone that they have a peculiar relationship with intelligence, and then someone tells me, wait, do you mean they're dumb? I can tell them, no, of course I don't believe they're dumb. And that's a denial on epistemic grounds. I deny having the belief that the person is wrong. But that's not the same thing as denying having meant that. So in a communicative scenario, I can also say, no, that's not what I meant, even though I believe it, right? So these are, I think, variations that could be interesting to look at, because denying can be subdivided into canceling, disavowing, and perhaps other things which are being discussed in the literature at the moment. Okay, now what we see is that because we are in this frontier between logos, the content of a given utterance, and then the impact of that on the speaker's image, their trustworthiness, and on the target's image and their trustworthiness, we think that these mechanisms, they play with epistemic vigilance. So in other words, they try to have an impact on the way we will process the utterances of the person who is being attacked. And the idea is that if they are disparaged, what they say will tend to be less believable and less credible. Okay, Now, that's pretty much everything on the experimental side. Now, there's, of course, a more political upshot, because this idea of denial is I think quite interesting in today's political landscape. I mean, you guys know this much better than me. There are studies who show that people like Trump and now mainstream politicians just try to deny just about anything, really. Not only what they might have implied, but also what they have explicitly said. And this on the public sphere seems to be not that big a deal. I mean, he still got elected, right? And well, he's not convicted yet, but let's see what happens. So with this, what I want to say is that studying the way people deny what they have uttered, so depending on whether it's explicit content or implicit content, can probably help us better take position in those more global debates where people accuse each other of everything and then they deny having done that. Well, if we study the way people process that at the experimental level, maybe we'll be a bit, wiser. That's at least the hope. All right, thank you very much. That's all for me.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was fascinating. I will now open it up for questions.
Should I unshare my screen?
Yes, that would be fine.
Okay. So there we go.
Wonderful. And it's a quick reminder, this is being recorded. So if you don't mind having your question recorded, you can certainly just raise your hand and shout it out. We only have 17 people here, so that's pretty manageable. Otherwise, you can type your question in the chat and I will be happy to voice it on your behalf. Yes, Gilbert Plummer.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Steve. Could you possibly put back the description of the first study, this description of the scenario, the first study?
Yeah. Just a sec. Here we go. And where do I share? Right here. Okay. Yeah. There you go. Do you see it?
Yeah, just a second. Yeah. I guess I was a little concerned that the context is so minimal there that inferences might be problematic because of that. I think the your other prompts were better in that regard. Does that concern you at all? I mean,
so yeah, thanks.
I mean, like, what can I? One thing is, like Kevin says, the staff of this restaurant doesn't do anything good. Well, they were discussing what to order, but that remark by Kevin sort of sounds like it might be a remark about service too. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is one of 39 items, and of course, so we did spend a lot of time on those, not on this particular part of the context, but on the insinuations, because we had a few constraints to uphold, in the sense that they should be insinuations that could be denied, and so it was quite complicated. So for this one in particular, I agree. So we do mention in the context that they were discussing what makes a cook exceptional, and Kevin's remark can be taken about staff. Yes. The other thing is that we can't make the context much bigger, because the more you put in there, the more likely you are to unwittingly introduce confounding variables. So this is at the same time the frustrating part, but also the necessary parts if you want to have something that shows results, because we need to keep things as simple as possible, knowing at the same time that interactions are much more complex than that. I mean, this is just lines on a screen, and interactions do not look like that. So there's a lot of things we need to abstract from, sorry. And we chose to really give a minimal context. In the other study, the one about the stain, we had at one point a concern that the context itself was already staining without even anyone insinuating anything about the person, specifically in those contexts where the upcoming insinuation would be true or warranted. So in the follow-up that we're building now, we're going to do a threefold measure. We're going to measure the trustworthiness after the context to see if the context is already playing a role, after the insinuation, and then after the denial. So these are things we're still working on, but I do take your point. Yeah, this item is perhaps not the best. I would need to check the others, but we have tried to make the insinuations relevant to whatever was said in the context, but not too obvious either, right? We didn't want people right after the context to think that Kevin is, you know, some bad person who disrespects service or chefs, or, you know.
Yeah. Could you say what the N it was for that first one again?
I don't have it, but we usually go for 80 or 100 participants.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. This is, by the way, we're writing the paper finally after all this time, so we're submitting it before the end of the year, and I hope to be able to distribute it to those interested next year.
Scott, yes.
Yeah, nice talk. I have a couple of questions. One is, did you test to see whether people understood the insinuation?
We did. All items were pre-tested. So what we did, we gave the scenarios and we asked people to choose between 3 possible interpretations. One of them was irrelevant, one of them was insinuation, one of them was the literal meaning. And they seem to work in the way that we want them to work.
Yeah, did you get a sense of how many people don't get the insinuation?
No, we didn't have that, actually. Yeah. And now in all the studies that we do, we pretest them to make sure that they're understood the way we understand them. So right now I'm conducting a study with 2 students on where's the stress? Prosodic aspects of insinuation. So where, for instance, some people have claimed in literature that an insinuation has a very distinct intonational contour of a rise, fall, rise type.
Yeah.
And, you know, are you going to go out with that would convey something like it doesn't suit you? And also a pause, right? So are you going to go out with that as opposed to are you going to go out with that? Okay, so now what we're doing is we're pre-testing all the items. Actually, we have to analyze the pre-test now. We just completed it on Tuesday. We basically asked people to choose in how the addressee would regard the target of the insinuation, whether it's positive or negative. And that way we hope to see that all insinuations work as a negative ascription.
Okay, well, that falls then into my second question, which is, what's the difference between an implicature and an insinuation?
Yeah, I know. I attempted to answer this question in a paper, but after rereading the paper, after it was published, as I gave a talk on it, I wasn't so much convinced anymore. So I have to rework that. So people would say, you know, this is what I had here. Basically, insinuation is implicature that disparages someone, right? That's one way of seeing things. A case has been made to show that this is not exactly the same thing. So there's a paper by Dominguez Armas and Soria Ruiz in 21, and they argue that insinuation is not coextensive with implicature because of the way their denial affects the conversation. So if you take Grice's example, you know, there's a petrol station around the corner, which means you can get gas there. And then you deny it. No, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean it was open. Then retrospectively, your utterance, there's a petrol station around the corner, seems to be completely uncooperative. Why the hell would you say that at that point?
Right.
But with insinuation, because the good ones, they have a plausible denial, they wouldn't appear to be cooperative. So for instance, they work on provocative insinuations like headlines with a racist undertone, like, you know, Iraqi refugee rapes girl. And they would argue that this insinuates that Iraqis are bad people. Now, because there's a plausible denial, this was just facts, we're just reporting on what happened. This doesn't make the headline uncooperative as a headline, right? So that's one of the differences that they argue. And I think that we still have a lot of work to do, by the way, on teasing out the links between deniability with respect to accountability, commitment, and responsibility, because these things are not exactly the same thing. And I'm trying to sort these things out, hopefully in an upcoming paper at some point, but I think that there's more work to be done there. And denial is a very important feature of that discussion, I think.
Yeah. Oh, can I ask one more question? In your charts, what are those bars?
These things here?
Yeah.
That's the extent of the answers.
That's like that's not the confidence interval.
I have to go back to my stats guy. So Daniel, I can give you an answer by email. Right now, I don't have it. I'm sorry.
Okay, because the one place where you got the persuasive effect, the bars overlap quite a bit.
So wait, I forgot what. Yeah,
that looks like this. Is that the right? Is that the correct graph? Because that looks like the same one as.
I think so. So I need to go back to the analyses. I need to go back to that. Now,
okay.
What is
that,
true
I mean, because that's what I'm getting. That looks like your first one.
Sorry?
That looks identical to your first one.
Yeah, okay. So, but no, the stats showed that it is significant, whereas in the first case it wasn't. Now, the problem is these effects are very small, and we know that. And at the same time, so it's cool that we have a statistical effect, but it's not cool that it's not more spectacular. But at the same time, these things are quite subtle. We're not claiming that if you insinuate an ad hominem, you win in all cases, and people will flip just because of that, instead of asserting it. But there seems to be something happening, so we still have to dig deeper to see at which level exactly this is happening. And our hunch for this kind of scenario is that it has to do with politeness, rudeness, and something like that.
Right.
But yeah, so this is the beginning.
Well, anyway, I'd go back and check to see whether that picture
I will
is
check that.
what you really intended to put in.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Dale, I think you had a hand.
Yeah, I did. Could you unshare so that I can actually see your face? Anyway,
Hi, Dale.
I'm very, very interested in what happened due to your pre-testing.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that one of the possibilities in an insinuation is that people don't get it. But you pre-tested to make sure that everybody understands the insinuation, essentially equating the content between the received content of the insinuated and the asserted ad hominem. And consequently, I think your finding of no effect pretty much across the board there is basically just a confirmation that your pre-testing was right.
Yeah.
It seems to me that once you have equated the meaning, then what remains for you to study is the evasiveness of the insinuator, the failure to take responsibility for being explicit, or what in the argumentation community we call commitment.
Mhm.
And I think that the ethos questions, I'm sorry, the trust questions, were basically your only chance of finding an effect.
Yeah.
I was thinking very early on in your presentation about some very old meta-analyses that Dan O'Keefe did, in which he explored whether or not making the conclusion to an argument was more effective than leaving the conclusion unstated, basically a meta-analysis of enthymemes. And his meta-analysis indicated that making the conclusion explicit was more effective, which is, a statement about the extent to which people don't understand stuff that's obvious to people like us, when we're studying. I think your failure to find the explicitness effect that Dan discovered so long ago is due to your having pre-tested the insinuations that they don't get and pre-tested them the hell out of the study. And so I don't quite know how to deal with that, but given your pre-testing, I think that really all that's left for you to study is a commitment, evaded responsibility, and stuff like that.
So I think that's exactly what we thought after the first experiment.
Oh,
thought,
okay.
So this means that because there's no difference between the assertion and the insinuation, this means that people understand it to be the same, right?
Yeah.
And that also got us to think, okay, so insinuation is kind of a more or less weak type of meaning, right? It's not as blatant as assertion, and there are some which are much more elusive or opaque than others. Bell in his work talks about transparent innuendo, opaque innuendo, and probably going towards those extremes might also give us different results. But the thing is, if you go too much into opacity, then people don't get them.
Well, but that might be where you find the effects.
And
I had a second
encouraging
thought.
thing is also, the encouraging thing also is that the with the denial, we might have something there too, because if you manage to insinuate something, but at the same time, you manage to have a very good alternative candidate as what you meant, then that might be very useful for you in terms of ethos, precisely in terms of speaker image. There are examples with Trump where I think he didn't manage to do that, and examples where he did manage to do that. The Second Amendment people case, when he basically said that the Second Amendment people could do something to prevent Hillary from winning the election, and he meant shoot her. Well, when he was questioned, he said, no, I meant Second Amendment people, those who support the Second Amendment, should vote for me. And in that context, that was quite believable. So it was an insinuation that was very plausibly deniable. And probably this would change things in an experimental setting if we manipulate for that.
If I can follow on, thinking about, O'Keefe and the enthymemes and stuff, led me to a second realization that you have restricted yourself to negative enthymemes, insinuations or ad hominems and stuff. And I thought of an example where one can imply, I don't know whether you've defined it out of the realm of insinuation, but suppose you had a high school daughter and she had brought home some friends, and you thought one of the guys would be excellent for her to date. But being an experienced parent, you know better than to say that. So you might just make some remarks about how so-and-so's a nice looking kid. He seems smart to me. Gotta go. And so it would be a positive insinuation or a positive, enthymematic, unstated conclusion. And I wonder why you've only decided to study the negative stuff.
So it comes from a definition of insinuation in the literature, and so I would be favorable to making the definition a bit more vague, in the sense that it doesn't necessarily have to be negative, but it has to uphold this principle that the content is normatively problematic. In your example, it is normatively problematic for a parent to push his daughter towards this person, right? Because you're messing with you're interfering with their love life and their freedom. So I can see how that could be normatively problematic, even if you want something good in the end for them, right?
Yeah, well, I kind of blundered into that, but it does suggest that perhaps you ought to be looking at the motives of the I don't know, implier. Let's
That's what he had in the
term.
second experiment, where we have a true and a false context, right, on the stain. In one context,
yeah, that does approach it.
Yeah, there was
But,
the insinuation was warranted, and then
you'd have somewhat different motives in the date the nice boy case.
Yeah, but that's a good example, yes, because the motives could be very laudable, and not necessarily interested or malignant. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid I have to state overtly that I need to vacate the room right now. So this was a wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Steve. And I will be getting this up on our website as soon as I can. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the questions. A pleasure.
Yep, very good.
Thank you. Bye-bye.